This video is about quoting. We are going to touch on summarizing and paraphrasing just a little bit in the beginning of it, but most of this is about quoting. So, all right, well, let's start with quoting. You're going to be quoting things in order to preserve some of the original language of the author that you're using ideas or words from. That is, if the author has some very memorable language that is found within some idea that you need from that author, you want to quote those memorable parts, those extremely unique, potent, powerful pieces of language. Sometimes you have to follow that with some interpretation or explanation or clarification, but usually if it needs clarifying, you should avoid quoting it altogether and paraphrase. It just depends on what it is, but generally speaking, if the language is tricky, convoluted, confusing, complex, to the point where the reader, your reader, needs it interpreted or explained to them, then in general you don't want to quote at all, and you want to go ahead and paraphrase that language and just put it all in your own words, all of that portion that you need to keep, the ideas, you just clarify them, put them in your own words. And summary. Generally speaking, you summarize just when you need to get the main idea. Or maybe you need the main idea plus supporting ideas. Or maybe you need the main idea, supporting ideas, and supporting evidence. But you don't want to put too much in there. Because if you paraphrase, that's saying you're basically keeping the same length and all of the ideas and all of the details, just putting it all in your own words. But if you summarize, you cut out some of those lesser important pieces of information, details, or ideas. So you only keep the main ones, and you put those in your own words in a summary. All right, well, let's get back to quoting now. So we talked about some of the reasons that you would quote over summary or paraphrase, but some of the important elements of quoting. All right, well, one is that you generally don't want to quote a complete sentence. Another is, and I'll just give you an overview of these, and then we'll go over them more specifically with some examples, okay? So don't quote a complete sentence as a rule of thumb. Sometimes that leads to a freestanding quote. That is a quote that you put in your essay that starts at the beginning of your sentence and ends at the end of your sentence. Well, so that's really not your sentence at all. You're just putting a quote in the middle of your essay, sent from one end to the other. It's the whole sentence with quotation marks around it. Even if you have the author cited, it does not make it acceptable. It's a freestanding quote, and you cannot have a freestanding quote, and we'll get into that in a little bit too. You want to, again, so you want to quote a part of a sentence from the original author, just a portion of it. That is the most important part of it, the most potent language that's relevant to your essay, or the most memorable language as long as it's relevant to your essay. And keep that phrase or portion of the sentence intact, put in quotation marks, but around it you have your own words. But when you have your own words, it flows from you to the author, back to you again. You have to make sure that it flows. It's not just rigid, and you have some of your own words, and then you have some of the author's words, and then some of your own words again, and that's rigid. No, you want to make it sound like it's like if you closed your eyes and read it aloud, or if you read it aloud and someone closed their eyes and listened to it, rather, they shouldn't be able to tell where those quotation marks actually are. It should sound like a very smooth sentence. And again, we'll get into more specifics, give you examples of that too. There's also the use of ellipses when you need to take something out that's not relevant to your argument. As long as you're not changing the context or the meaning of the original quotes, you can take portions of it out. Use ellipses where those portions are not needed, or where those unneeded portions are. And you don't need to do that at the beginning of the quote or the end of the quote. Wherever you start the quotation, it's understood that there's other words that came before it and after it, or almost always are. So you don't put an ellipses at the beginning of a quote There's 3 dots of the ellipses, right? And you don't put those the ellipses at the end of a quote either. All right, so, and then there's also the use of brackets within a quote. So brackets are used to change words or to take to change sections of quotes. So the only reasons you can change anything in a quote, though, is if you use well, one, you have to indicate you've changed something by using the brackets around anything that you've changed. 2, you can only change it if you are changing it for 2 reasons. One is to clarify something, like a pronoun. If you say the word he, or if the author said the word he, and you need to clarify who he is in your essay when you're quoting something, then you put the actual name of the person in brackets instead of the word he. And it's not changing the meaning or the context, it's just clarifying. So you can use it to clarify, and you can also use it to correct the grammar. Not that the original author had incorrect grammar, hopefully not, but because, again, you are using your own words in portions of the sentence, and then the quote is in somewhere within your sentence. Well, if you're using past tense and the author was using present tense, you might need to add an ed ending to one of the original author's verbs, because you're all in the past tense, right? And so if you're going to make it flow, you're going to make it flow smoothly from your words through the author's words back into your words. Well, you've got a subject verb in the past tense, and the author had in a present tense. Well, you might have to just change the ending or the whole word, sometimes the whole verb. But if you need to add an ed ending, you just put that ed in brackets. Or if you need to change the whole word, it's in a regular verb maybe, and you need to change it from fly to flew, then you just put flew in brackets. So you're only changing the tense. Generally speaking, you're not really changing any of the meaning other than tense or whatever the grammar issue is. Sometimes you need to just make the grammar flow from your words through the author's words back into your words. So you can use brackets to change something only. Again, 2 reasons: for clarification or for grammar. All right, and let's see. I will remind you real quick, always avoid plagiarism when you're quoting, paraphrasing, or summarizing. So there are some rules when you don't have to cite when you are, let's say, using only one author's words. But let me just, for starters, until you learn those rules, I will just say cite always if you're using an author's ideas in a summary or paraphrase, or if you're using an author's words with a quotation. With any of those situations, you always cite, and that'll help you avoid plagiarism. When you're not using quotations, even if you're citing, again, you have to make sure you put the paraphrase or the summary into your own words. If you're not using those quotation marks, you're saying that all of those words are your own. So make sure, if you're not using those quotation marks and you're citing an author, make sure that they are all of your own words. So, all right. Okay, so let me show you some examples. Okay. Well, this was taken from A White Heron by Jewett, Sarah Orne Jewett, I believe. The quotes are, that is, and the ideas that surround the quotes sometimes. So this says beginner, but this first one says beginner, but there are some things that are not for beginners. Like, let's show you the brackets. For example, most beginners are not using brackets to change things. But the reason it says beginner is because it's only it's a fairly large portion of the original sentence from the short story that from here to here, it's a fairly large portion that ends up in the student's essay. So, like I said, I think I've said it, you only need to quote a small portion, whatever the most important parts are. But as you're learning to do that, you might have to have quite a bit of the quote in the beginning, and then you start narrowing it down as you get better. All right, so here we have the white. Oh, this is, by the way, I skipped 1 and 2. We're moving straight to 3 beginner instead of 1 and 2. We're not going to bother with 1 and 2 because those would be for more like elementary school kids or middle school kids or even some of the high school kids, but not for college students. So here we are. So the white heron symbolizes freedom, something Sylvia did not have. Oh, by the way, maybe you're not familiar with A White Heron by Sarah Orne Jewett. White Heron is a short story, essentially is about a little girl who is kind of an orphan. I think she lives on her relative. She moves to her relative's farm for a duration of time, however long that is, and she's lonely when she's there. And on this farm, there's a cow. She's basically best friends with the cow. And she goes exploring with this cow and plays hide and seek with the cow. And I guess I could put it on. I should show you the storyteller. I'm trying to summarize some of the story. Anyway, so this girl Sylvia, she goes exploring off into far ends of the land. I'm not sure if it's all on the original farm or nearby, but in any case, it's a lot of land that isn't what do you call it, developed. And so she has seen this very rare bird, a white heron, at least once, and there's a hunt, and she sees its beauty, right? Well, she also meets this little hunter. This little boy is a hunter, and he's looking for this rare bird, and she doesn't reveal its location. But in any case, one day she hasn't revealed this bird's location, but she sees. She doesn't see the bird yet. Excuse my retelling of this story, but she climbs this tree, and she climbs this huge tree, the biggest tree in the entire area, and she climbs all the way to the top, and it's quite an expedition just climbing the tree, but she gets to the top, and she could probably see the ocean. I think I don't know if she's in Massachusetts or somewhere on the East Coast, but she probably see just about anything that's around, and she feels free. Unlike when she first moved there, like I said, she was lonely, and she sort of feels trapped, like she has nowhere to go, she has no one to talk to, and she feels like she's dead inside. So you should probably feel sorry for her. And then she climbs this tree, and she feels some sort of freedom because she can see everything, and she sees this white heron, and she sees the white heron, and it does, I don't know, does a trick or two or something, and she sort of, at that moment, she feels this freedom, and she feels this connection with the white heron. And anyway, there's a lot more to the story, but that gives you a general sense of what's going on in this story, and so at least we will be able to follow a little bit better. All right, so the white heron symbolizes freedom, something Sylvia did not have. Sylvia notices a white spot of him like a single floating feather coming up from the dead hemlock and growing larger. This heron living up there by itself is just as lonely as Sylvia was. All right, so that's what the student wrote it's beginner, but it's pretty good. The reason it's beginner though is because there's very minimal a minimal portion of the sentence that is the student's own words. Sylvia and notices. All right. So you really do want more of your own words, but the positive about this is that it flows very smoothly between here and here across this entire sentence, and it's very smooth with the grammar. Change the tense to stay in the present. So Sylvia notices a white spot of him like a single floating feather coming up from the dead hemlock and growing larger. So it's nice and smooth. If you had closed your eyes, you probably would not notice that there was a quotation mark right here. Okay? I will point out something else. Sometimes when you say Sylvia says, and then if the rest of this were a complete thought, it's even more of a beginner than this. But if you said that, then you would put a comma here. But since this is not a complete thought, and it's not Sylvia says or Sylvia states, those two ideas combined, you don't put a comma here. It just flows very smoothly from here to here. Okay? Let's see what this explanation here says. Probably a lot of what I just said, but let's read it anyway. This quote is combined with the student's words at the beginning or end. This example embeds at the beginning. Editing the quote by cutting out the first two words of the original quote. There were two words in the beginning. And making the grammar correct by changing the verb forms, right, here and here. Using brackets where changes are made. Notice the meaning does not really change. And remember, you can't change the meaning when you change anything, even if you use brackets to indicate you changed something. Alright, so it's getting basically it's more grammatically sophisticated than the last two examples that I did not show you, and I will not show you. They're too simple. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at the next example, the intermediate. This was embedded partially, this first one, because the student's words were at the beginning, so it's only partially embedded. But the second one, this one, is embedded fully. That is, student's words are at the beginning as well as the end of the sentence. Okay, so this one says, the white heron symbolizes freedom, something Sylvia did not have. Sylvia notices a white spot of him like a single floating feather growing larger, reinforcing how, like Sylvia, the heron is isolated and alone but free. Okay, so this is a little more advanced, mainly because there are the student's words at the beginning as well as at the end. It still flows smoothly between here and here, as well as here and here. So if this were read to you and you had been closing your eyes, you shouldn't be able to tell that there are quotation marks here or here. But in addition to the brackets on this word that's still within the quote, this time the student also added ellipses, took out a few words that were not really necessary for the meaning of this essay, yet also did not change the meaning of the quote. If you take something out and it changes the meaning of the quote, you are misrepresenting what the student or what the original author was saying. You can't do that. So Sylvia notices a white spot of him, like a single floating feather growing larger, reinforcing how, like Sylvia, the heron is isolated and alone but free. I also will identify that this is, a lot of times when you're writing in college, you're going to have the author's name here. This is fiction. This is a character's name. So in this case, we're having to put the author at the end, citing the author. It was also cited in this first example. But so if, let's say you said the author notices, that would be fine. You wouldn't have to put the citation at the end in brackets. Okay? I mean in parentheses. It's the author. This is MLA format. You have the author followed by the page number. You don't put a comma or the word page, or you don't put a abbreviation for page or anything else. You just put the author's last name and the page number. If there is a page number, if there's no page number, you don't put one. You just put the author. Whether it's here or, if it's appropriate at the beginning of the sentence, with this basically talking about a signal phrase naming the author. This quote is fully embedded, and the student takes ideas. And the student's ideas have become the focus, with the quote acting as integrated support. It goes further with more skill than the beginner embedding. All right, let me also point out. So remember, the most potent or memorable language should be here. The white spot. There's a white spot of him. It's sort of like a heron. This heron is very far away, far enough away. And single floating feather. This is sort of like related to her. It symbolizes her. If it's this thing that's floating and it's free, growing larger. See, now she feels more powerful with her new sort of freedom she feels. And so these are important words. They're not just flowery words. They're important to show the symbolism. So that's why they're still here. Let's look at the more advanced quote, that's the embedded quote. When I say it's embedded, that means it's put within something else. So like when you embed something, you put it within something else. So when we embed a quote, we're putting a quote within students' words or our own words. If I embed a quote, I'm putting a quote within my words, within a sentence of my own. So I have these words here, and then these here. Most of this, now that it's advanced, most of this is my words, are my words, or students' own words. So let's look at this one. The white heron symbolizes freedom. That intangible goal Sylvia ached to feel. She marvels at the white spot, like a single floating feather, as she has the epiphany that the heron is isolated and alone like her, but free as it glides anywhere it pleases. All right. Now we have very little left of the original quote. We wanted to keep the white spot. We wanted to keep like a single floating feather. Those are the most important words, the most potent, memorable, and poetic words. Kept those, and most of this is the student's words here. All right, the student is in even more control of the quote. More is cut, allowing deeper insights to fill the space of the sentence. Deeper insights from the student. See, we're using just a few of the words and we're embedding it in our thoughts. Okay? The student very carefully chooses words. Intangible, ached, epiphany, and glides. These are powerful words also. You don't necessarily need the author to speak all of these powerful words. You can have your own words that are extremely powerful and specific and unique. So the student chooses words carefully. The student very carefully chooses words that show a perceptive understanding of the quote and its connection to the student's own idea as expressed in the topic sentence. Imagine where the rest of this paragraph will go, with more to come. Okay? So, let me see. I think that we're just about done here with this. Let me take a look at my other notes here first. Yep. That should be about it. So I hope this is a very helpful video on how to embed quotes. You are going to need to quote and you're going to need to cite, but I don't want you to overdo the quoting. If you can say something better than the original author that is more clear, then you should probably paraphrase or summarize. But if the author has something very specific, very important to keep intact as with the original, very important to keep intact with the original language, then keep those portions, just the small portions, the most powerful parts of those sentences intact in quotation marks, and embed that in your own paraphrase. You can paraphrase the rest of the sentence in some cases. That's great. A lot of this, what we just saw, weren't paraphrases, more interpretations or analyses. But if you're having trouble putting a lot of analysis around that quote in the same sentence, that can be okay. And if you paraphrase portions of it and you keep the essential parts of it in quotation marks and you paraphrase the end of it or something like that, so you fully embed some of these quotes. That should be about it for today. I hope you all have a great day. Bye.